Hey, what's up, everyone? As you might know if you watch the station, I tend to follow financial stuff and especially anything that involves metals. Unlike some people, though, I'm interested in precious metals and also base metals. I think it's something people kind of ignore a lot, and it's kind of a cool thing to follow. So, I have something I want to show you. I think it's something you've probably seen before, though, and right there we have a roll of pennies, and we have a roll of nickels. Now, you might say, okay, $2 of nickels and 50 cents of pennies. Let's assume the pennies are all copper pennies, 1981 or older. I don't count the 82s because they stopped making them out of copper midway through the year. But I went to a site called coinapps.com. If you haven't been to coinapps.com, it's pretty interesting. And I'll show you what I came up with while I was there. So, as of my crunching the numbers here, which really they crunched them for me, but nickel was selling for $12.90 a pound. Copper was $4.72 a pound. It was probably only a few months ago that copper was around $7 or $8. Excuse me, nickel was $7 or $8 a pound. Copper was like maybe like 350, 375. Well, right now, like I said, 472 for copper, 1290 for nickel. Um, the old copper cents that they stopped making out of copper in early 82, mid 82, are now worth 3.1 cents apiece. Now that's scrap value. Now I know someone's going to say,
But it's illegal to melt U.S. pennies. It's against the law, so it doesn't matter.
well, you're half right. It is illegal to melt U.S. pennies for their scrap value, but they would be wrong in saying it doesn't matter because it most certainly does matter because there is value in them outside of what their face value is. Um, it's copper. Copper's valuable. It's a store of value if you want to get right down to it. And if they're older copper cents, like wheat pennies, then you probably get some value on top of that just because it's the older style of penny. I mean, before I was able to get them on eBay for 5, 6 cents a piece. That's going up a lot. Check eBay lately and look for, do a search on wheat pennies. Just plain regular run of the mill wheat pennies, not the old ones, not good dates, just really crummy, highly circulated 40s and 50s wheat pennies. And you see them kind of selling for some crazy amounts, particularly for smaller amounts. And I'll call smaller amounts 1,000 or less. Yeah, they're selling for a lot more than a 3.1 cent scrap value, and substantially higher than what you would have paid maybe a year or two ago. So this rising underlying copper value is gonna be meaningful at some point. Also, every year we have billions of zinc pennies coming into the market, and Gresham's law. I did a video on that about a month or so ago. Bad money drives out the good. You're going to get more and more people who are pulling out copper pennies. I'd pull them out too if I were you. Like I said, I keep mine in a big 5-gallon Home Depot bucket. If I were you, I would do the same. Just keep throwing them in there. Doesn't really take too much to kind of just look at the date and throw them in. And in a lot of cases, it's getting even easier now because number one, there's not that many of them, compared to a few years ago. Um, you know that if they have the um, shield on the back, they're not copper, and you know, so that really just leaves you to like look for the Lincoln, the ones with the memorial backs. And if you want to get right down to it, almost half of those, are copper. Well, actually, a little over half of those are probably copper because you figure from 1959 through almost 82. So you're dealing with about 23 years of those and like 25 years. That's about half half. Okay, but then we'll leave that for a second. We'll move on to nickels. Now, nickels, 7.5 cents for nickels. So if you have a roll of copper cents, it's not worth 50 cents. It's worth $1.54 in scrap value. If you have a roll of nickels, they are not worth $2. They are worth $2.98 scrap value. Because don't forget, there's not only nickel, there's also copper. Another thing to point out is Canadian pennies. I save all the Canadian pennies that I get. Doesn't matter the yeah, I even save the ones that aren't copper for some reason. I don't know why. Now I've had people tell me Canadian pennies are quote unquote worthless because they were essentially demonetized by the Canadian government. Well, they're not worthless to me because depending on what year pennies you have, like for example the 1942s to 1979s, I believe they were 98% copper and they're 3.3 cents a piece scrap value. They actually have more copper than the US pennies have, and a roll of them is $1.65, just scrap value. It seems like it's worth something to me. Now, there were also other years after I think from 1980 to 96. I think like instead of being 3.2 grams, they were like 2.8 grams. So there's still a lot of copper in them, for a penny, but not as much as the 42 to 79s. So just keep that in mind. So they're still mainly all copper, but just not quite as much. But still, I definitely keep them all. I have them all enrolled so that I save. Another thing to keep your eye on is Canadian nickels. Now, Canadian nickels are pretty interesting. From 1946 to 1981, I have 100% here, but they were actually like 99.9% nickel. That is almost 13 cents a piece face value. Not face value, intrinsic scrap value, which is pretty cool. A roll of those isn't worth $2, it's worth $6.45. Now, I don't see those in circulation as much as I used to. I very rarely see Canadian nickels in circulation anymore, to be honest with you. And when I do, they are usually the newer ones, which are made of steel. So, again, I kind of save those just because I always did from when I was a kid. But, if you have the ones from 46 to 81, they're nickel. I told them aside. Really, it's 5 cents. You can afford 5 cents. And just to compare that to some of the other denominations we have, if you check it out, this is kind of laughable here. You have dimes, which have an intrinsic value of just 2.7 cents. So if you think about it, only 27. So its intrinsic value is only 27% of its face value. Quarters 6.7 cents. So that's like maybe a little over, probably about 27% around there, really. Half dollars, also about 27%, only 13.4 cents. The dollar coins are horrendous. Only 8 cents of intrinsic scrap value out of $1, so it's only 8.2%. Kind of worthless, unless you trust the full faith and credit and the promise of the government. Then it's totally awesome. It's wonderful. Embrace it. But if you want something that actually has some value, I mean, look at the pennies. Again, 3.1 cents. So they're worth about 160%. I'm sorry, that's about 310%. Wow, it's a long day. The nickel's 50% more in intrinsic value than face value. So it's something I would actually keep aside if I were you. Now with the pennies, I mean, it's only a penny. It kind of reminds me of like star notes. Like I read if you're not sure what star notes are, they're just kind of replacement notes, have a little star on them. Check them out. So whenever I see a star note in circulation and it's a $1 star note, I only save it. But I had a couple of $100 star notes. I didn't save them because the $100 star notes weren't rare star notes. So they were probably worth only slightly more than $100. It really wasn't worth keeping it for that really tiny premium. Plus, they weren't in good condition anyway. So I just kind of put them with the rest of my money. $1 bills, whether they are rarer star notes or common ones, whether they're in beautiful and circulated condition or they're circulated, I always keep them because I'm only out $1. We really can't buy much with $1, so why not just keep the $1 star note? Whereas with the $100 bill, until inflation eats up the rest of our money, I can actually do quite a bit with the $100 bill. So I'm not going to save that one aside unless it's like really rare and in really good condition. Then I will, because then it's worth my while to do so. Same thing with the pennies. It's a penny. Keep it. You can't do much of anything with a penny. You can't even get penny candy anymore, for Pete's sake. So if you see copper pennies, I implore you, keep them. At some point, I think you're going to be glad you did. The nickels. Well, the thing with the nickels is I don't save nickels. I know you're probably thinking, well, you're making this whole video about this kind of thing, so why? But let me just kind of uh, go into a little more detail here. With nickels, they're all the same composition. Unlike pennies, we haven't had the pure copper, or almost pure copper composition in 40 years. Nickels, same composition, hasn't changed. Now, if the nickels get driven out, then you're probably going to see people, I should say, if they change the composition to, like, say, steel, which I think is going to happen soon. I really think it's probably on the drawing board now, because if nickel prices and copper prices stay up this high, there's no way they're doing this, because they have to put 7.5 cents into each one that they make, in addition to all the costs for transport and actually creating it. And so, I mean, it might end up costing them 15 or 16 cents to make a 5 cent nickel. They don't like that. That kind of pisses them off. So I think sooner rather than later, you're going to see some major plans to go into, like, steel nickels. Even with the zinc pennies, even zinc pennies are actually worth more than a penny. They're worth like 1.02 cents, which again doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you're talking about that tiny amount over the 1 cent mark, multiplied by billions, plus the actual cost to produce it, they're going to end up going to something cheaper. I don't know what they could go to that's cheaper than zinc. I'm sure there's a lot of junk metals out there, but they're going to do it. So what I do with the nickels is I tend to save the older dates. I save 40s, I save 50s, and a lot of people would think I'm crazy, but I keep the 60s too. I even keep the 64s, and if you look, 64s are like the most plentiful year around. It's insane. You can get like 10 rolls of nickels, and you will get like a lot of 64s. You may only get a couple of 40s or a couple of 50s. You probably won't get any 2009s. I always keep those, but you're going to get a ton of 64s, and I tend to keep them just because I figure if I'm going to keep some nickels, I'm going to keep those older ones. Just something I do, no rhyme or reason, just the craziness in my head. But I just wanted to share this with you because I'm kind of hoping some of you might also um, kind of get into following this, because you know, I think it's weird, but it's kind of still like a secret. I think a lot of people just have no idea how much these metals prices are rising, and this is going to drive them to change compositions. I know it's going to change compositions, so it's worth it to try and maybe get some of these together now, um, rather than maybe being sorry 10 years from now, saying, I wish I had saved some nickels when they actually had nickel in them. Or I wish, I remember you could actually get copper pennies, and then they're going to disappear. Like right now, if you find a wheat penny, it's possible, but you don't really see it that much. I mean, if I go through a box, I might get a few. Sometimes I'll get lucky, I'll get like 10 or 12, but that's out of 2,500 pennies, and I'll get 10 or 12. That's a good day. But a lot of times, I might only get a couple. So just a little something for you to keep in mind. I hope you're having a good one. Please subscribe if you have any interest in these kinds of videos, because like I said, firearms and and knives are near and dear to my heart. I like doing those, but I like to throw tool videos in, coins, metals. I should do some currency videos too. Um, kind of like the whole thing, because I noticed that a lot of people who are into firearms are also into knives. They're also into tools, and they're into coins and currency and stuff. I know, and some acquaintances I have. So I'm hoping you might find some of this of interest too. So have a good one, and like the video if you do in fact like the video. See ya.